The massive chamber stretched out like a metal canyon, with walls that seemed to touch the stars themselves. 47 different species sat in their assigned sections, each group looking as different from the others as night from day. Some had scales that shimmered under the artificial lighting, others had fur that changed colors with their moods, and a few looked like walking trees with eyes that glowed like fireflies. The air hummed with translation devices working overtime to convert thousands of different languages into something everyone could understand. At the center of it all stood Ambassador Zifter of the Velinari Empire. His species looked like a mix between a praying mantis and a peacock, with a crest of feathers that could spread wide when he was angry or excited. Right now, those feathers were spread to their full width, making him look twice as large as normal. His forearms gestured dramatically as he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of authority that came from representing one of the oldest and most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. For 10,000 years, Zefter declared, his words echoing through the chamber, the Galactic Council has maintained peace and order throughout known space. We have prevented wars that could have destroyed entire star systems. We have stopped species from expanding too quickly and disrupting the delicate balance that keeps our galaxy stable. In the human section, 3 figures sat perfectly still. Commander Jake Morrison wore his Earth Defense Force uniform with quiet pride. The fabric was a deep blue that seemed almost black under the chamber's lighting, with silver bars on his shoulders that marked his rank. His face showed nothing as he listened to the alien's speech. Beside him, Dr. Lisa Chong held a small tablet where she took notes with quick, precise movements. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple style that kept it out of her eyes as she worked. On Morrison's other side, Captain Roy Bennett sat with his hands folded in his lap, his eyes focused on some point far beyond the chamber walls. The 3 humans looked small compared to most of the other delegates. They had no fancy technology floating around them, no glowing armor, no servants or guards. Just 3 people in simple uniforms, sitting quietly while the most powerful beings in the galaxy decided their fate. However, Zefter continued, his voice growing louder, one species has chosen to ignore our guidance. One species has spread across the stars like a plague, taking whatever they want without asking permission. In just 50 years, they have claimed 12 star systems and built colonies on 47 different worlds. The holographic displays around the chamber lit up, showing images of human settlements. There was New Dallas, a sprawling city built in the desert of a world 300 light years from Earth. The buildings rose like silver spears into an orange sky, while human children played in parks, filled with plants from a dozen different worlds. There was New Geneva, where humans had turned a lifeless rock into a garden world with blue oceans and green continents. Mining stations floated around distant stars, pulling precious metals from asteroids, while human workers lived in spinning habitats that created artificial gravity. They build without permission, Zefter said, pointing one of his long, thin fingers at the displays. They take resources without asking. They spread their kind across space like seeds in the wind, never stopping to consider the consequences of their actions. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Some species nodded their agreement, their own expansion having been limited by council rules for thousands of years. Others seemed curious about these humans who had done so much in such a short time. A few looked nervous, remembering their own first encounters with council judgment. The council has been patient, Zefter announced. We have sent warnings. We have tried to guide them toward proper behavior, but they continue their aggressive expansion as if our words mean nothing to them. Commander Morrison shifted slightly in his seat. It was such a small movement that most of the aliens in the chamber missed it entirely. But Dr. Chong noticed, and she made another note on her tablet. Captain Bennett's eyes flicked toward Morrison for just a second before returning to their distant focus Therefore, Zephyr declared, his crest feathers spreading even wider, the Galactic Council hereby issues its final ultimatum to the species known as humanity. The chamber fell completely silent. Even the humming of the translation devices seemed to quiet down as every being present waited to hear the terms that would decide humanity's future. Humanity has 30 standard galactic days to complete the following requirements, Zephyr announced, his voice carrying the cold authority of absolute power. First, they must withdraw all colonists, military personnel, and equipment from every world beyond their home system of Sol. Second, they must submit to Council oversight of all future space travel, with no ship leaving Sol system without proper authorization. Third, they must accept technological limitations that will prevent them from developing weapons or tools that could threaten galactic peace. The alien ambassador paused, letting his words sink in. Around the chamber, representatives from dozens of species watched the human delegation for their reaction. Some had seen other species receive similar ultimatums over the centuries. The usual response involved desperate pleading, offers of tribute, or angry threats that meant nothing against Council power. Failure to comply with these terms, Zephyr continued, will result in corrective measures being taken against the human species. The Council has reduced 3 other aggressive species to pre-industrial civilizations within living memory. We have the power and the will to do so again if necessary. The silence in the chamber grew heavier. Every eye, sensor, and recording device focused on the small human delegation. This was the moment when species typically broke down, when their representatives either begged for mercy or raged against the inevitable. The Council had seen it all before Commander Morrison slowly stood up. His movement was calm and controlled, like someone getting up from a comfortable chair to answer the door. He looked around the vast chamber, his gaze moving from one group of aliens to another. He seemed to take a moment to study each species, as if he was trying to memorize their faces for some future purpose. And he finally spoke. His voice carried clearly through the chamber's acoustics. The human delegation acknowledges receipt of the Council's terms. Then he sat back down. That was it. No protests about the unfairness of the ultimatum. No desperate attempts to negotiate better terms. No angry speeches about human rights or freedom. Just a simple acknowledgement that they had heard what the Council demanded. The silence that followed was different from the expectant quiet that had filled the chamber moments before. This was the silence of confusion, of beings who had never encountered such a response to their ultimate authority. Council members looked at each other with expressions that their translation software couldn't properly convert. Some seemed puzzled, others appeared almost insulted by the lack of drama. Zephyr's crest feathers fluttered uncertainly. In 10,000 years of galactic politics, no species had ever responded to a Council ultimatum with such complete indifference. There were procedures for dealing with anger, protocols for handling desperate pleas, and methods for managing defiant speeches. But there was no manual for dealing with 3 humans who simply acknowledged the terms and said nothing else. Does the human delegation wish to respond to the Council's generous terms? Zephyr asked, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. Commander Morrison looked up at him with calm, steady eyes. We have nothing further to say at this time. Dr. Chong closed her tablet with a soft click. Captain. Bennett stood up along with his 2 companions. Without another word, the 3 humans walked out of the chamber, their footsteps echoing in the silence they left behind as they disappeared through the exit, the greatest powers in the galaxy. Sat in stunned quiet, trying to understand what had just happened. For the first time in 10,000 years, someone had heard their final warning and responded with ice-cold silence. None of them realized that silence could be the most dangerous response of all. The elevator descended deep into the heart of the Rocky Mountains, carrying President Helen Carter and her advisors to a place that officially did not exist. The underground complex had been carved from solid rock decades earlier, designed to survive anything from nuclear war to asteroid impacts. Now it would serve as the command center for humanity's response to an ultimatum from the stars. The Situation Room buzzed with quiet activity as representatives from every major nation on Earth took their seats around the massive conference table. The walls displayed holographic maps of human space, showing the 12 star systems that humanity had claimed over the past 50 years. Each system glowed with a soft blue light, connected by lines that represented the shipping routes and communication networks that bound them together into FUDs. Something resembling an empire. President Carter stood at the head of the table, her hands resting on the polished surface as she looked at the faces around her. These were the people who had helped humanity reach for the stars, who had overseen the greatest expansion in human history. Now they faced the possibility of losing it all. "They want us to crawl back into our hole," Carter said, her voice carrying the slow drawl of her Kentucky childhood. 30 days to abandon everything we've built out there, everything we've worked for. General Paul Wright activated another display that showed the human colonies in more detail. New Dallas appeared first, its domed cities housing 3 million people who had been born under alien skies. Children played in parks filled with plants from Earth, while their parents worked in factories that produced goods for world's humanity had never dreamed of visiting just a century ago. "Ma'am, even if we wanted to comply, we couldn't evacuate 12 systems in 30 days, Wright said, his weathered fingers pointing to different colonies as he spoke. "We're talking about 15 million people spread across 47 worlds and installations. Our transport ships can't carry that many people, and most of these folks have never even seen Earth." Dr. Rebecca Torres stood up from her seat near the middle of the table. As head of the Terra Sciences Division, she had overseen many of the technological advances that made human expansion possible. Her dark eyes held a spark that suggested she knew something the others didn't. "The question isn't whether we can comply," Torres said, her voice cutting through the worried murmurs around the table. "It's whether we will." She activated a new set of displays that showed comparative data between human technology and what they knew about alien capabilities. Charts and graphs filled the air around the table, showing everything from weapons development to ship construction to manufacturing capacity. Secretary of State Karen Mills leaned forward in her chair. "What do you mean, Rebecca?" Torres smiled, and there was something cold in that expression that made several people around the table sit up straighter. "While they've been playing politics for 10,000 years, we've been innovating. Our weapons, technology, our ship designs, our manufacturing capabilities. They've gotten comfortable with their power. We haven't gotten comfortable with anything." She pointed to a chart showing human technological development over the past 50 years. The line rose sharply, almost vertically, compared to the flat lines representing alien advancement. "They think they know what we're capable of because they've been watching our expansion. But they've only seen what we wanted them to see." General Wright's eyes narrowed as he studied the data. "Are you saying we have military capabilities they don't know about?" "I'm saying that while they were busy maintaining their 10,000-year-old empire, we were busy figuring out how to survive in a galaxy that doesn't want us here," Torres replied. "Every colony ship we sent out carried more than just settlers. Every mining station we built included more than just resource extraction equipment." President Carter felt a chill run down her spine. "Rebecca, what exactly have you been building out there?" "Insurance," Torres said simply. "The kind of insurance that makes sure humanity survives, even if someone tries to wipe us out." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Around the table, leaders who had thought they knew everything about human expansion realized they had only seen the surface. Below that surface, it seemed other preparations had been made. Carter made her decision. Send the message. Within. Hours, coded transmissions flashed across human space at faster-than-light speeds. The signals traveled along the same communication networks that carried news and entertainment to human colonies. But these messages were different. They contained instructions that had been prepared years earlier, contingency plans that most colonists had never imagined would be needed. On New Dallas, Governor Steve Parker received his message while eating breakfast with his family. His wife noticed the way his face went pale as he read the small display device, the way his hands started to shake slightly. "What is it?" she asked. Parker looked at his children, who were arguing about what games to play after school. "Pack only the essentials," he told his wife quietly. "We're going underground." Similar scenes played out across human space. On New Geneva, construction crews that had been building shopping centers and schools suddenly switched to different projects. The blueprints they pulled out had been stored in sealed containers for decades, marked with warnings that no one had ever expected to read. Mining stations that had been pulling precious metals from asteroids began extracting different materials. Their massive industrial equipment, designed to crack open space rocks and extract valuable ores, proved surprisingly adaptable when pointed toward other purposes. Deep space, listening posts that monitored cosmic radiation and tracked asteroid movements quietly reconfigured their sensors. Instead of looking for natural phenomena, they began watching for alien ships. The aliens had given humanity 30 days. Humanity began using every single one of them. Transport ships that normally carried consumer goods between colonies suddenly found their cargo holds filled with equipment that looked nothing like televisions or furniture. Passenger liners that usually brought tourists to see the wonders of terraformed worlds began carrying passengers who carried briefcases handcuffed to their wrists on Earth. Factories that had been producing cars and computers and clothing began retooling their production lines. The changes happened quietly, often during normal maintenance periods, but workers noticed that the new assembly instructions were very different from the old ones. Research facilities that had been working on improvements to faster than light travel suddenly shifted their focus to projects that had been sitting in filing cabinets marked theoretical only. Scientists who had been studying peaceful applications of their discoveries found themselves asked to consider less peaceful possibilities. Dr. Torres moved between these facilities, like a ghost, appearing wherever the most sensitive work was being done. She carried with her authorization codes that opened doors most people didn't even know existed. Behind those doors, she found projects that had been waiting patiently for the day when humanity would need them. "How long have these been ready?" asked Dr. Martin Cole, one of the lead researchers at the Luna City facility. "Since we first left Earth," Torres replied, watching as his team assembled devices that looked nothing like anything in the textbooks. "We always knew this day might come. The galaxy is a dangerous place for species that don't know how to defend themselves." Captain Bennett, who had been in the council chambers just days earlier, now found himself aboard a ship heading toward the outer edge of human space. His mission was classified at levels that required presidential authorization, but the basic idea was simple enough. Humanity needed to know exactly what they were facing, and Bennett was the kind of man who specialized in finding things out. His ship looked like a standard cargo hauler from the outside, the kind that carried supplies to remote mining stations. Inside, it was something very different. The cargo hold contained equipment that could monitor alien ship movements from light years away, while the crew quarters housed people who specialized in the kind of work that didn't appear on any official records. As Bennett's ship reached the border of human space, he activated communication systems that connected him directly to President Carter's Situation Room. "Ma'am, we're in position. What do you see out there, Captain?" Bennett studied the displays that showed the space beyond human territory. "Nothing yet, but they're coming. Question is, are we ready for them?" Back on Earth, President Carter looked Around the Situation Room, at the faces of people who had just learned that their species had been preparing for interstellar war since the day they first left their home planet. I guess we're about to find out. The aliens thought they had given humanity an ultimatum. What they had actually done was start a countdown to something the galaxy had never seen before. Humanity had been quiet for 50 years, building and expanding and learning. Now that quiet time was coming to an end in 25 days. The Council would learn what humanity had been doing while they weren't paying attention. 25 days after the ultimatum, Council surveillance stations began detecting anomalies throughout human space. The long-range sensors that had been quietly monitoring humanity's expansion for decades suddenly started picking up energy. Signatures that made no sense. Instead of the expected evacuation ships heading toward Earth, human vessels were spreading out further into space, moving toward systems they had never claimed before. Admiral Vexner of the Council Intelligence Division stared at the holographic displays in his command center aboard the monitoring station Nexus Watch. His species? The Kethlan had evolved from predatory hunters, and their enhanced senses made them perfect for intelligence work. Right now, those senses were telling him that something was very wrong with what he was seeing. "Show me the human ship movements." Again, he ordered his aide, Lieutenant Korth. The displays updated, showing the movement patterns of human vessels over the past 25 days. Instead of the expected convergence on Earth, the ships had scattered like seeds in a windstorm. Some headed toward uninhabited systems that humans had never shown interest in before. Others moved to asteroid fields and dead moons that offered nothing but empty space and radiation. "They're not evacuating," Korth observed, his translator device rendering his clicks and whistles into standard galactic speech. "They appear to be expanding their presence." Vexner's hunting instincts screamed. Danger. In his home world's oceans, prey animals sometimes scattered in all directions when threatened, making it impossible for predators to focus on any single target. But that only worked if the prey had somewhere safe to run. In space, there was nowhere to hide from the Council's power. "Contact Ambassador Zefter," Vexner ordered. "He needs to see this." Meanwhile, on the Council homeworld of Nexus Prime, Ambassador Amy Collins sat in her modest office within the human embassy. The building was small compared to the massive structures that housed the delegations from more established species, but Collins had never been bothered by size. She had spent her career making deals in corporate boardrooms where being underestimated was often an advantage. Her aide, Marcus Webb, knocked on her door before entering. "Ma'am, Ambassador Zefter is here to see you. He seems agitated." Collins looked up from the reports she was reading, documents that contained information the Council would have found very interesting if they knew it existed. "Send him in." Zefter entered the office with his crest feathers already spread wide, a clear sign of anger among his people. His forearms gestured dramatically as he spoke, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. "Your species appears to be expanding rather than withdrawing," he announced, his translator device giving his words a clipped, mechanical quality. "This is in direct violation of the Council's ultimatum." Collins gestured to the chair. Across from her desk, a piece of furniture designed to accommodate the various body types found throughout the galaxy. "Please, sit down. Would you like some coffee?" The alien's crest feathers fluttered with confusion. In his experience, species facing Council ultimatums were usually too terrified to offer refreshments. "I did not come here for social pleasantries." "No, I suppose you didn't," Collins replied, pouring herself a cup from the pot on her desk. The coffee was real Earth-grown beans, shipped across hundreds of light years at enormous expense. She took a sip and savored the taste of home. "You came here because your surveillance systems are showing you things that don't match your expectations." Zephyr's 4 eyes focused on her with laser intensity. The ultimatum specified that humanity withdraw from colonies beyond the Sol system and submit to Council oversight. We are still waiting for your compliance. Collins set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. And we're still considering our response. There is nothing to consider, Zephyr said, his voice rising. Compliance is mandatory. According to whom? Collins asked, her tone as casual as if she were discussing the weather. The question seemed to stun the alien ambassador. His crest feathers collapsed slightly as he struggled to process what he had just heard. According to the Galactic Council, we maintain peace and order throughout known space. Species that refuse to comply are corrected. Collins leaned back in her chair, studying the alien with the same attention she had once given to difficult clients during her corporate days. And we're supposed to be impressed by this, because why exactly? Because the Council has the power to enforce its will, Zephyr replied, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. We have reduced entire civilizations to primitive states. We can do the same to humanity. You can try, Collins said simply. The silence that followed stretched uncomfortably long. Zephyr had expected fear, anger, or desperate attempts at negotiation. Instead, he found himself facing a human who seemed genuinely unconcerned about the most powerful organization in the galaxy. On the 15th day after the ultimatum, the Council's surveillance network detected massive energy signatures from human space. Deep space sensors designed to monitor stellar phenomena suddenly registered power outputs that rivaled small stars. The energy signatures were moving, which meant they were coming from ships, but no known vessel could generate that much power. Without destroying itself in the process, Admiral Vexner found himself staring at readings that made no sense according to everything the Council knew about human technology. Run the analysis again, he ordered his technicians. The results came. Back the same. Somewhere in human space, ships were generating energy levels that should have been impossible for a species that had only been traveling between stars for 50 years. On the 10th day, 3 Council scout ships sent to investigate the energy signatures simply vanished. The ships had been traveling through what humans called the New Geneva System, conducting routine surveillance of the terraformed world that had become one of humanity's proudest achievements. The last transmission from Scout Ship Vigilant came at 1432 Galactic Standard Time. Approaching human colony world for visual confirmation of evacuation status. All systems normal. At 1433, the ship's transponder signal disappeared from Council tracking systems. No distress call, no explosion signature, no debris field. A ship was simply there one moment and gone the next dot. The same thing happened to scout ships Watchful and Guardian over the next 6 hours. 3 state-of-the-art Council vessels, equipped with the best sensors and defensive systems the galaxy could produce, had vanished without a trace in human space. Admiral Vexner stared at the empty sensor displays, where the 3 ships should have appeared. In 10,000 years of Council operations, scout ships simply did not disappear. They were fast, stealthy, and heavily shielded. Even if something attacked them, they should have had time to send a warning. Send a priority message. To the Council chambers, he ordered. Something is happening in human space that we don't understand. On the 5th day before the deadline, the Council's final diplomatic message to Earth went unanswered. A transmission, sent through the fastest communication relays available, should have reached the human government within hours. Instead, it seemed to vanish into the void, as if Earth itself had stopped listening to outside communications. Ambassador Zephyr found himself pacing in his private chambers, his crest feathers constantly shifting between colors as his emotional state fluctuated. He had overseen the submission of dozens of species over his long career, and the pattern was always the same. First came defiance, then fear, then desperate attempts at negotiation, and finally complete surrender. Humanity was not following the pattern. His aide entered the chamber with the latest intelligence reports. "Sir, our monitoring stations report that human ships are still moving throughout their territory. They appear to be taking defensive positions around key installations." "Defensive positions?" Zefter's crest flared red with anger. "They cannot hope to defend against the Council fleet. Their technology is primitive compared to ours." "Yes, sir. However, our analysts note that the energy signatures from human space continue to increase. Some of the readings are now beyond our equipment's ability to measure accurately." Zefter felt something he had not experienced in centuries: uncertainty. The Council had faced rebellious species before, but none had ever responded to an ultimatum with such calm preparation. Most species either surrendered immediately or lashed out in hopeless fury. Humanity was doing neither. On the day of the deadline, Admiral Tok'ron of the Council fleet took position at the edge of the Sol system with 1,200 ships under his command. The fleet represented the combined military might of 47 species, vessels that had never known defeat in 10,000 years of maintaining galactic order. Tok'ron stood on the bridge of his flagship, the massive dreadnought Eternal Justice, and studied the displays showing human space. Earth floated in the distance, a small blue world that had somehow produced a species bold enough to defy the galaxy's greatest power. "Long-range sensors detect a human fleet approaching," his tactical officer reported. 800 ships, led by a vessel identifying itself as the USS Constitution. Tok'ron's multiple hearts beat faster with anticipation. Finally, the humans were going to fight. It would be a short battle against an enemy that was outnumbered and outgunned. The space between the two fleets hung silent and dark, filled only with the distant light of stars that had watched civilizations rise and fall for millions of years. Admiral Tok'ron stood on the bridge of his flagship, studying the human ships that faced his massive fleet. The Council vessels stretched out in perfect formation, their hulls gleaming with the advanced alloys that had protected them through countless battles over 10,000 years. The human ships looked different. They were smaller, built with clean lines that spoke of efficiency rather than intimidation. Where Council vessels displayed their power through size and ornate decorations, human ships appeared almost plain by comparison. But Admiral Price had spoken with such confidence that Tok'ron found himself wondering what these humans thought they could accomplish against overwhelming odds. "Begin the advance," he ordered his fleet commanders. "Standard formation. We will demonstrate Council superiority and accept their surrender when they realize resistance is futile." The Council fleet moved forward like a wall of metal and energy, 1,200 ships advancing in the battle formation that had terrified the galaxy for millennia. Their weapons charged with power that could crack planets, their shields glowing with energy fields that had never been breached by enemy fire. Admiral Price watched from the bridge of the USS Constitution as the alien fleet approached. Her tactical officer, Commander Lisa Torres, monitored the displays that showed the Council ships advancing in their traditional pattern. "They're coming straight at us," Torres reported, "maintaining formation just like their tactical manuals say they should." Price nodded slowly. "They've been using the same battle tactics for 10,000 years. Why change what's always worked before?" Captain Marcus Webb, Price's communications officer, looked up from his station. "Ma'am, should we open communications again? Give them one last chance to withdraw? They had their chance 30 days ago." Price replied, "Signal all ships. Execute Plan Defiance." What happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for generations, but in the moment, it looked like complete chaos. The human fleet, which had been holding a defensive formation around Earth, suddenly scattered in all directions. Ships broke away from the main group and accelerated toward empty space, their engines burning bright as they fled the approaching Council armada. Admiral Tok'ren watched with satisfaction as the human ships ran. This was exactly what he had expected from a species that was too young and foolish to understand their place in the galaxy. "Pursue the fleeing vessels," he ordered. "We will hunt them down and capture them before they can escape to spread word of their defeat." The Council ships broke formation to chase the scattered human vessels, their commanders eager to claim victory over the species that had dared to defy Council authority. The massive alien fleet spread out across the solar system, individual ships and small groups racing after human vessels that seemed to be running in blind panic. Captain Roy Bennett commanded one of the human ships that appeared to be fleeing. His vessel, the USS Liberty, raced away from Earth at maximum speed with a Council destroyer in pursuit. The alien ship was larger and more heavily armed, but Bennett's crew had been preparing for this moment for weeks. "They're gaining on us," reported his tactical officer, Lieutenant Sarah Kim. "Let them get closer," Bennett replied calmly. "We want them to think they have us." The Council destroyer closed the distance rapidly, its commander confident that he was about to capture one of the fleeing human ships. The alien weapons charged with deadly energy as the gap between the two vessels narrowed to firing range. Now, Bennett ordered the space around the Council destroyer suddenly filled with objects that had not been there moments before. They appeared from nowhere, as if reality itself had decided to manifest a field of metallic spheres that surrounded the alien ship. The destroyer's sensors screamed warnings as hundreds of devices materialized within weapon range. But these were not ordinary mines or missiles. They were something the Council had never encountered before, self-replicating autonomous weapons that learned from each encounter. The moment the destroyer's weapons fired at them, the devices analyzed the energy patterns and adapted their defenses. Accordingly, the first volley from the Council ship destroyed a dozen of the mysterious objects. The remaining devices immediately reconfigured themselves based on the data from their destroyed companions, becoming immune to the same type of attack. When the destroyer fired again, its weapons had no effect at all. Then the devices began to replicate. Each one split into 2 identical copies, then 4, then 8. Within minutes, the space around the Council destroyer swarmed with thousands of adaptive weapons that surrounded the alien ship like angry wasps. The same scene played out across the solar system as other Council ships found themselves trapped by weapons that appeared from empty space. Admiral Tok'ren watched in growing horror as his fleet's perfect formation dissolved into chaos. Ships that should have been pursuing fleeing humans instead found themselves fighting for survival against enemies that seemed to multiply every time they were attacked. "What are these weapons?" he demanded of his science officer. "Unknown technology, sir. They appear to be learning from our attacks and adapting their defenses in real time. Every time we destroy one, the others become harder to kill." "Admiral." Price watched the battle unfold from her command center, her expression calm as reports came in from across the system. "Status report," she requested. Commander Torres consulted her displays. "The minefields are performing as expected. Council ships are taking heavy damage as they try to pursue our scattered vessels. Their formation is completely broken." Captain Webb looked up from his communication station. "Ma'am, we're receiving surrender requests from 17 Council ships. They're asking for safe passage out of the system." "Denied," Price replied without hesitation. "They came here to destroy us. Now they can learn what happens when you threaten humanity." The battle raged for 6 hours, but it was unlike any conflict the galaxy had ever seen. Instead of massive ships trading devastating volleys of energy, it became a deadly game of cat and mouse played in 3 dimensions across an entire star system. Council ships found themselves chasing human vessels that led them into carefully prepared traps. while swarms of adaptive weapons made it impossible for the aliens to use their superior firepower effectively. Admiral Tok'ran realized too late that the humans had not been running away in panic. They had been leading his fleet into a trap that had been prepared over 30 days of careful planning. The scattered human ships were not fleeing at random. They were following predetermined courses that led Council vessels away from each other and into killing zones where human weapons waited. "Recall all ships," he ordered desperately. "Reform the fleet and retreat to minimum safe distance." But it was too late. His ships were scattered across the solar system, each one fighting its own battle against weapons that grew stronger and more numerous with every passing minute. The Council fleet that had entered the Sol system in perfect formation was now broken into hundreds of individual battles, with human ships appearing and disappearing like ghosts, while their mysterious weapons took a terrible toll as the hours passed. The tide of battle became clear. Ships that had dominated the galaxy for millennia found themselves outmaneuvered by vessels built by a species that had been in space for only 50 years. The Council's advanced technology proved useless against weapons that adapted to every attack, while human tactics confused commanders who had spent centuries studying warfare that followed predictable patterns. When the battle finally ended, Admiral Tok'ran found himself aboard one of only 300 Council ships that remained operational. The rest of his fleet drifted powerless in space, their systems disabled by weapons that had learned to target their most vulnerable points. His once mighty armada had been reduced to wreckage in a single day by an enemy he had thought was primitively equipped. Admiral Price's face appeared on his command screen, her expression unchanged from the beginning of the battle. "Admiral Tok'ran, your fleet is defeated. Withdraw from human space immediately, or we will finish what you started." Tok'ran looked at the tactical displays showing the remains of his fleet. The humans had demonstrated something the Council had never encountered in 10,000 years of galactic dominance. They had proven that superior numbers and advanced technology meant nothing against an enemy that refused to fight by the established rules. "The Council will hear of this," he said, his voice hollow with defeat. "I'm counting on it," Price replied. "Make sure they understand what happened here today. Humanity does not surrender. Humanity does not bow. And humanity will not be limited by anyone who thinks they have the right to tell us what we can and cannot do." The communication ended, leaving Admiral Tok'ran to contemplate the impossible truth that his fleet had been destroyed by a species the Council had thought was barely capable of space travel. As his surviving ships limped away from the Sol system, he wondered how the galaxy would change now that humanity had proven the Council could be defeated. Behind them, the human fleet regrouped around Earth, their weapons still active and ready. They had given the galaxy a demonstration it would never forget. 6 months after the battle that destroyed the Council fleet, the great chamber that had once echoed with the absolute authority of galactic power now felt different. The walls remained the same, stretching up toward the artificial stars, but the air no longer hummed with the confidence of beings who had never known defeat. Instead, there was uncertainty, the kind that comes when the natural order of things suddenly changes overnight. Ambassador Amy Collins walked through the chamber toward the podium that had once been reserved only for the most powerful species in the galaxy. Her footsteps echoed in the unusual quiet as representatives from dozens of worlds watched her approach. Some of these beings had never imagined they would see a human standing where only Council members had been allowed to speak. For 10,000 years, the chamber was notably emptier than it had been during humanity's ultimatum 6 months earlier. Several species had withdrawn their ambassadors after what the galaxy now called the Sol Incident, unwilling to remain in an organization that had suffered such a complete defeat. Others had sent new representatives, beings who were curious about the species that had accomplished the impossible. Collins reached the podium and looked out at the assembled delegates. She wore the same simple Earth uniform that the human delegation had worn during their first appearance in this chamber. But now that simplicity carried a different meaning. It was no longer the clothing of a minor species asking for permission. To exist, it was the uniform of a power that had proven it could not be controlled. The human delegation wishes to address the Council's concerns about aggressive expansion. Collins began, her voice carrying the same calm authority that had marked humanity's response from the beginning. In the seats once reserved for the Velinari Empire, Ambassador Zefter sat with his crest feathers carefully controlled. The proud display that had marked his delivery of the ultimatum was gone, replaced by the cautious posture of someone who had learned that the galaxy was no longer predictable. Beside him sat other council members whose confidence had been shattered. Along with their fleet, humanity acknowledges that our rapid expansion into galactic space has caused concern among established civilizations. Collins continued, "We understand that change can be uncomfortable, especially for those who have grown accustomed to stability." She activated a holographic display that showed human territory as it existed now, 6 months after the battle. The 12 star systems that had sparked the original conflict were still there, but they were no longer alone. New settlements had appeared throughout the region, connected by shipping routes that bypassed traditional council space entirely. However, we also believe that the galaxy is large enough for all species to coexist without arbitrary limitations imposed by any single governing body. Collins said, her words carrying across the silent chamber. Ambassador Zefter found his voice, though it lacked the commanding tone he had used during the ultimatum. "What are humanity's intentions regarding galactic governance?" Collins smiled, and several alien species recognized the expression as what humans called diplomatic, though they were no longer certain what that might mean coming from a species that had destroyed the greatest fleet in galactic history. "Humanity has no interest in ruling the galaxy. We're explorers, not conquerors. We simply want the freedom to explore, to build, to grow, to exist without asking permission from anyone." She paused, letting her words sink in as she looked around. The chamber had beings who were still trying to understand how their 10,000-year-old order had collapsed so completely. The Council had 10,000 years to build something magnificent. Instead, you built a system designed to prevent anyone from surpassing you. That's not governance. That's stagnation. The Kethter representative, a tall being with crystalline features that reflected the chamber's lights, leaned forward in his seat. "And if other species wish to expand as humanity has done, then they should expand," Collins replied simply. "The galaxy doesn't belong to any of us. It belongs to all of us." Her words would have been considered impossible heresy just months earlier, but now they carried the weight of demonstrated power. The species that had spoken them had proven they could back up their beliefs with force, which gave those beliefs a significance that mere philosophy could never achieve. In the months that followed Collins's speech, the old council structure began to dissolve not through conquest or revolution, but through simple irrelevance. Species that had been held back for millennia by council regulations began to explore beyond their traditional boundaries. The Helix Confederation, which had been limited to 3 star systems for 2,000 years, quietly began surveying nearby worlds that had been declared off-limits by council decree. The Spiral Arm Mining Guild, which had operated under strict quotas for centuries, suddenly found themselves free to extract resources from asteroid fields that had been reserved for future council use. Their productivity increased by 300% within 6 months, leading to technological advances that had been stagnant for generations. Young species that had been told they were too primitive for serious expansion began launching colony ships toward worlds they had only dreamed of reaching. The Council's careful balance of power, maintained through artificial limitations, crumbled as species discovered they were capable of far more than they had been allowed to attempt. On Earth, President Helen Carter stood in the Oval Office looking up at the night sky through windows that had been reinforced against orbital bombardment during the crisis. Press Secretary Don Murphy entered with the daily briefings, carrying reports from a galaxy that was changing faster than anyone had imagined possible. "Ma'am, the Velinari Empire has requested a formal alliance," Murphy reported, setting down a stack of documents that represented communications from across known space. "The Kethter want to establish trade relations. 3 more species have asked for assistance with terraforming projects." Carter smiled as she watched construction ships moving across the star-filled sky, their lights visible even through Earth's atmosphere. "Remember when our biggest worry was whether we'd be allowed to keep 12 star systems?" "Yes, ma'am," Murphy replied, consulting his notes. "Now we're helping design colonies for half the galaxy. The Kepler Mining Consortium wants us to share our asteroid extraction techniques. The Centauri Agricultural Alliance is asking for advice on terraforming. And the Deep Space Exploration Society wants to hire human navigators for their expansion into the Galactic Rim." Carter turned back to her desk, where reports from human colonies told stories of rapid growth and development that was no longer constrained by alien oversight. New Dallas had tripled in size as refugees from council-controlled worlds arrived, seeking the freedom to build their own futures. New Geneva had become a hub for interspecies trade as beings who had never been allowed to deal directly with each other discovered the benefits of free commerce. "What about the council itself?" Carter asked. "Still meeting, but with about half the members they had 6 months ago," Murphy replied. "Most of the major powers are trying to figure out what their role is in a galaxy where they can't simply impose their will on everyone else." Dr. Rebecca Torres entered the office carrying a tablet filled with data from the Terra Sciences Division. Her face showed the satisfaction of someone whose long-term planning had proven successful beyond her wildest expectations. "Ma'am, I have the latest reports from our deep space monitoring stations," Torres said. "We're detecting new colonial efforts by 17 different species, all in regions that were previously off-limits under Council regulations. The Spiral Mining Guild has established 3 new extraction facilities in the past month alone." Carter nodded, understanding the implications. "The galaxy is waking up." "Yes, ma'am. For the first time in 10,000 years, species are expanding and innovating without asking permission first. And they're looking to us for guidance on how to do it safely." Outside the Oval Office windows, the lights of human ships continued their journeys toward distant stars. Construction vessels headed toward the Andromeda Galaxy, carrying supplies for humanity's first extragalactic colony. Exploration ships pushed toward the Galactic Rim, searching for worlds that no species had ever seen. Research vessels investigated phenomena that had been declared too dangerous for study under the old Council restrictions. Ambassador Collins, now serving as Earth's representative to what remained of the galactic government, sent regular reports about the changing political landscape. The rigid hierarchy that had defined interstellar relations for millennia was being replaced by something more fluid, more dynamic, and ultimately more alive. The Council gave its final warning 6 months ago, Collins wrote in her latest report. To Earth, they thought they were ending humanity's expansion into space. Instead, they ended their own control over the galaxy. Species that had been sleeping for thousands of years are finally waking up, and they're discovering that the universe is much larger and more interesting than they were ever allowed to know. President Carter finished reading the report and looked up at the stars that no longer seemed distant and forbidden. Humanity had responded to the Council's ultimatum with ice-cold silence.